I walked into the classroom happy, but the teacher made me leave in tears. The morning sun beamed through the classroom windows of Jefferson Middle School, casting long rectangles of light across the freshly waxed floors. I remember how they gleamed that day, September 15th, 1997, a detail that somehow stayed with me through all these years. I was 12 years old, wearing my favorite yellow sundress, the one my grandmother had sewn for me, with tiny sunflowers embroidered along the hem. My hair was styled in 2 puffballs, adorned with yellow ribbons that matched my dress, a hairstyle my mother had carefully crafted that morning while humming Aretha Franklin. "You look beautiful, Zora," she had said, her fingers gentle against my scalp. "First day at a new school. You're going to shine." I believed her. I really did. The hallways buzzed with the typical first day of school energy, locker doors clanging, sneakers squeaking against linoleum, voices rising and falling, in waves of excitement and nervousness. Being the new girl in 7th grade wasn't ideal, but I clutched my notebooks to my chest and held my head high, just like Mama taught me. "Confidence is your crown," she always said. "Never let anyone tell you to take it off." Room 211, Ms. Eleanor Whitman's English class. I took a deep breath outside the door, adjusted my backpack strap, and pushed it open. The classroom fell silent as I entered. 20-something pairs of eyes swiveled in my direction, scanning me from head to toe. I'd been the only black girl in classrooms before. My family had moved from Atlanta to this predominantly white suburban area over the summer, but something about this particular silence felt heavier. Ms. Whitman stood at the front of the class, chalk in hand, mid-sentence about syllabus expectations. She was tall and thin, with auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to stretch her pale features. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on her narrow nose, and her lips were pressed into a permanent line of disapproval. "You must be Zora Henderson," she said, her voice clipped and cold. "You're late." I checked the Mickey Mouse watch on my wrist, a gift from my father. "It's only 8:01, ma'am. The bell just..." In my classroom, on time means early. "Take a seat." She gestured vaguely toward the back of the room. "And see me after class about the dress code." Confused, I glanced down at my sundress. There was nothing inappropriate about it. It fell well past my knees and covered my shoulders completely. Still, I nodded silently and made my way to the only empty desk, located in the far corner. As I settled in, I could feel the curious stares of my classmates. A blonde girl with a ponytail leaned over to her friend and whispered something that made them both giggle behind their hands. I pretended not to notice, focusing instead on removing my notebook and pencil case from my backpack. As I was saying, "Before we were interrupted," Ms. Whitman continued, "this year we'll be studying the classics of American literature. Fitzgerald, Hemingway, Steinbeck, the pillars of our literary tradition." I perked up at this. I love to read. My father, a literature professor at the community college, had introduced me to all kinds of books from an early age. Just last summer, we'd read Their Eyes Were Watching God together, and I'd fallen in love with Zora Neale Hurston, the woman I was named after, when Ms. Whitman asked if anyone had summer reading experiences to share. My hand shot up automatically. She scanned the room, acknowledging several other students first. After calling on 4 others, she finally, reluctantly, nodded in my direction. I read Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston, I said, unable to keep the enthusiasm from my voice. "It was beautiful how she..." "That's not on our reading list," Ms. Whitman interrupted, her tone dismissive. We'll be focusing on mainstream American classics, not niche cultural texts." The words hit me like a slap. Niche cultural texts? Zora Neale Hurston was one of the most important writers of the Harlem Renaissance. My father had explained how her work had influenced generations of writers, how she captured the authentic voice and experience of Black Americans in the early 20th century. "But Ms. Whitman," I began, my voice smaller now, "Hurston is considered a major American writer. Zora." She cut me off again, pronouncing my name with a strange emphasis that made it sound foreign and out of place. "In this classroom, we speak proper English. I won't tolerate that kind of vernacular." I blinked in confusion. "What vernacular? I was just—" "The way you're speaking," she said, setting down her chalk and crossing her arms. "The inflection, the slang. It's not appropriate for an academic setting." But I hadn't used any slang. I was speaking exactly as I always did, the same way I'd spoken in my honors classes at my previous school, the same way my professor father spoke at home. A few students snickered. The blonde girl with the ponytail whispered again to her friend, loud enough for me to hear this time. "Does she even belong here?" Hot shame crawled up my neck and into my cheeks. I wanted to defend myself, to explain that I was an A student who'd been reading at a high school level since 4th grade. Instead, I found myself shrinking into my seat, suddenly aware of every eye in the room on me. "Furthermore," Miss Whitman continued, "your dress is inappropriate for this learning environment." I looked down again at my sundress, bewildered. "But it follows the dress code. It's not too short or... It's distracting," she said, gesturing vaguely at the bright yellow fabric. "The color, the pattern. It doesn't fit the environment of this school. We aim for a certain level of decorum here." More laughter rippled through the classroom. One boy in the front row made a show of shielding his eyes, as if my dress was blinding him. Another mimicked my voice, though his imitation sounded nothing like me. It was an exaggerated, stereotypical impression that made my stomach knot. "I don't think you fit in here," Ms. Whitman said, her voice carrying a finality that silenced the room. "Not with that appearance, not with that way of speaking. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in Mrs. Johnson's standard English class down the hall, rather than in my advanced placement section." The implication was clear. She didn't think I was smart enough to be there. She hadn't seen my transcripts, hadn't given me a chance to demonstrate my abilities. She'd decided within 5 minutes of meeting me that I didn't belong. I lowered, my head feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of them. "Well," Ms. Whitman pressed, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" I opened my mouth, but no words came out. What could I possibly say that wouldn't be twisted or dismissed? That's when the classroom door swung open. Principal Diana Castillo stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. She was a short woman with salt and pepper hair styled in a practical bob, and a reputation for fairness that preceded her. I'd met her briefly during my enrollment the week before, and she'd been warm and welcoming then. "Ms. Whitman," she said, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of something hard and resolute. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The teacher's face registered surprise, then quickly rearranged itself into a mask of professional politeness. "Of course. Class, begin reading page 3 of your textbook silently." As Ms. Whitman crossed to the door, I noticed Principal Castillo's gaze find me in the back corner. For just a moment, her eyes softened with something like sympathy before she turned her attention back to the teacher. They stepped just outside the door, but the classroom was so quiet that fragments of their conversation drifted back to us. "Absolutely," inappropriate behavior. Don't understand what you mean. Our intercom was on the entire time. Simply maintaining standards. My office, immediately. The class erupted into whispers the moment they stepped out. The blonde girl turned fully in her seat to stare at me now, no longer bothering to hide her curiosity. "What did you do?" she asked, her tone suggesting that I must have done something terrible to warrant this attention. "Nothing," I said softly, looking down at my notebook where I'd been absently drawing spirals in the margin. "Absolutely nothing." 5 minutes later, Principal Castillo returned alone. She stood at the front of the classroom, her presence commanding, immediate silence despite her small stature. "Class, I need to address something that just occurred," she began, her voice steady and serious. "Ms. Whitman will not be returning to this classroom today. In fact, she may not be returning for quite some time." A collective gasp rose from the students. "What happened?" someone called out. Principal Castillo adjusted her glasses. "That's a personnel matter I cannot discuss in detail. However, what I can tell you is this. At Jefferson Middle School, we have zero tolerance for prejudice, discrimination, or bullying of any kind, whether it comes from students or teachers." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering meaningfully on those who had laughed at me. Several shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "Education is not just about books and tests," she continued. "It's about learning to be decent human beings who treat others with dignity and respect. It's about recognizing the rich diversity of voices and experiences that make up our community and our country." She moved to the chalkboard and erased Ms. Whitman's list of classic authors, then wrote in large letters, "American Voices, Diverse Perspectives. For the remainder of this week, I will personally be teaching this class," she announced. "And we're going to start with an author I believe one of you mentioned, Zora Neale Hurston." My head snapped up in surprise. Principal Castillo smiled directly at me. "Zora, would you be willing to share your thoughts on Their Eyes Were Watching God with the class?" 20-something pairs of eyes turned to me again, but this time the weight of their stares felt different. There was curiosity there, maybe, even a hint of respect. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice growing stronger with each word. I talked about Janie's journey to find her voice and identity in a world determined to silence her. I explained how Hurston captured the richness of Black vernacular English, preserving it as a vital part of American cultural heritage, rather than dismissing it as improper. As I spoke, I noticed the blonde girl watching me with genuine interest. The boy who had mocked me earlier was taking notes. When I finished, Principal Castillo nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Zora. That was eloquent and insightful." She addressed the entire class. "This is the kind of thinking and analysis I expect from advanced placement students. And this," she gestured toward me, "is what belonging looks like." That afternoon I was called to Principal Castillo's office. I walked slowly down the empty hallway, my footsteps echoing against the lockers. Despite her kindness in the classroom, I couldn't help but worry that I was somehow in trouble. When I entered her office, I found not only Principal Castillo, but also my parents, seated in chairs opposite her desk. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, while my father's jaw was set in the tight way it got when he was controlling his anger. "Zora," Principal Castillo said gently, "please sit down. I've been explaining to your parents what happened in Ms. Whitman's class this morning." "Am I in trouble?" I asked, my voice small. My mother reached for my hand. "No, baby, not at all." "Quite the opposite," Principal Castillo said. I wanted to personally apologize to you for the treatment you received. It was unacceptable, and I want you to know that it does not reflect the values of this school." My father leaned forward. "We're considering filing a formal complaint with the school board." Principal Castillo nodded. "I would support that decision. In the meantime, Ms. Whitman has been placed on administrative leave, pending an investigation. I've scheduled a meeting with all faculty for tomorrow morning to address this incident and reinforce our anti-discrimination policies." She turned to me. "Zora, I want you to know that you absolutely belong in that advanced placement class. Your previous school records show exceptional academic achievement, and your insights today on Hurston's work only confirmed that." The knot that had been sitting in my stomach began to loosen slightly. "There's one more thing," Principal Castillo continued. "I've decided to make a curriculum change. Instead of focusing exclusively on the traditional canon, our English department will be incorporating a more diverse range of American voices this year, including Hurston, Baldwin, Angelo, and others." My father's expression softened. That's excellent news. "And Zora," Principal Castillo added, "I love your dress. The sunflowers are beautiful." For the first time since that morning, I smiled. The next day arrived with a strange mix of dread and anticipation swirling in my stomach. I stood in front of my closet for nearly 30 minutes, deliberating. Part of me wanted to wear something muted and inconspicuous, beige or gray, something that wouldn't stand out. But another part of me, the part that had listened to my mother's stories about her own school days during integration in the 60s, knew that dimming my light wasn't the answer. In the end, I chose a blue dress with white polka dots, bright but not quite as bold as yesterday's yellow. My mother braided my hair into 2 French braids, tying them with blue ribbons. "Remember what Maya Angelou said," she told me as we stood at the bus stop. "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated." I nodded, clutching my backpack straps tightly. "And Zora," she added, her eyes serious, "if anything like yesterday happens again, anything at all, you call me immediately. You don't have to face these things alone." The school hallways seemed different that morning. Or maybe I was the one who had changed. Students who had never noticed me before now nodded in greeting. A few even smiled. Word had clearly spread about what had happened in Ms. Whitman's class. When I entered room 211, Principal Castillo was already there, writing on the board. The classroom had been rearranged overnight. The desks now formed a large circle rather than rows facing the front. "Good morning, Zora," she greeted me warmly. "Please, take any seat you like." I chose a spot near the windows where the morning light could warm my shoulders. The blonde girl from yesterday, I would later learn her name was Emma, entered shortly after and, to my surprise, sat in the desk beside mine. "Hey," she said, her voice uncertain. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about yesterday. The things I said, they weren't okay." I studied her face looking for insincerity, but found only genuine remorse. "When Principal Castillo asked you to talk about that book," Emma continued, "you sounded so smart, like way smarter than me. I felt stupid for what I'd said." "You're not stupid," I replied quietly. "You just didn't know me." "Well, I'd like to," she said, offering a tentative smile. "If that's okay." Before I could respond, Principal Castillo called the class to attention. "Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to discuss the power of language. How words can both harm and heal. How they can be used to exclude or to create belonging." As the discussion unfolded, more and more students began to participate. The boy who had mocked me admitted that he'd never actually read anything by a black author and asked for recommendations. Another girl shared her experience of being the only Asian student in her elementary school. Slowly, the classroom transformed from a space of judgment to one of sharing and listening. At the end of the period, Principal Castillo announced that our permanent teacher would be arriving tomorrow. Ms. Chen, a young English teacher, recently graduated from Columbia University with a specialty in American multicultural literature. "One more announcement," Principal Castillo said as we packed up our things. "We're holding a special parent-teacher meeting tonight at 7 o'clock. I'd like all of you to bring your parents if possible. It's important that we address what happened yesterday as a community." That evening, the school auditorium was packed. Parents sat beside their children, murmuring among themselves, clearly curious about the hastily called meeting. My parents and I arrived early, taking seats near the front. My father wore his tweed professor jacket, his armor, as he called it, while my mother had dressed carefully in her most professional suit. At precisely 7 o'clock, Principal Castillo took the stage, followed by several teachers and members of the school board. The room gradually fell silent. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began. "I've called this meeting to address an incident that occurred yesterday. An incident that I believe requires our collective attention and response." She proceeded to explain, in diplomatic but clear terms, what had happened in Ms. Whitman's classroom. She didn't mention me by name, but many eyes turned in my direction anyway. "What concerns me most," Principal Castillo continued, "is not just that this happened, but that it happened in a way that many students seem to find acceptable, even entertaining. That suggests we have work to do as a community." Several parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others nodded in agreement. "Ms. Whitman is not here tonight because she is on administrative leave," Principal Castillo explained. "However, I believe it's important that we understand exactly what was said and why it was harmful." She turned and gestured to the side of the stage. "Which is why I've asked someone to help us understand the impact of those words." To my complete surprise, Principal Castillo called my name and invited me to join her on stage. My mother squeezed my hand. "You don't have to, baby." But I did. I knew I did. I stood on shaky legs and made my way to the stage, acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes following my progress. Principal Castillo placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Zora has bravely agreed to share her experience. I want everyone to listen, really listen, to what it felt like to be in that classroom yesterday." She handed me the microphone, and I looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some uncomfortable, some openly compassionate. I spotted Emma and her parents in the third row. She gave me an encouraging thumbs up. I took a deep breath and began to speak. I described entering the classroom full of hope and excitement. I explained how quickly that hope had turned to confusion, then humiliation. I recounted Ms. Whitman's comments about my speech, my dress, my very presence in the advanced class. "The thing is," I said, my voice growing stronger, "none of it was true. I do belong in that class. I do speak proper English. And even if I used vernacular, that doesn't make me less intelligent. My yellow dress with sunflowers wasn't inappropriate. It was just mine. It was just me." The auditorium was completely silent now. What hurt the most wasn't even Ms. Whitman's words, I continued. It was that everyone laughed. Everyone assumed she must be right about me, without knowing anything about me. And that made me feel like I was invisible, Like the real me didn't matter because all anyone could see were their assumptions. I glanced at my parents. My mother was wiping tears while my father sat straight-backed with pride shining in his eyes. I don't want anyone else to feel the way I felt yesterday, I concluded. Not in this school, not anywhere. The silence held for one beat, then two. Before the auditorium erupted in applause, Principal Castillo reclaimed the microphone, thanking me as I returned to my seat on unsteady legs. "This is why we're here tonight," she said once the applause died down. "To make sure that what Zora experienced never happens again in our school." She then outlined a series of initiatives: mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff, a curriculum review committee that would include parents and students, a new anonymous reporting system for discriminatory incidents, and regular community discussions like this one. "But policies alone won't change culture," she acknowledged. "That requires all of us examining our own biases and assumptions, having difficult conversations at home as well as at school, and most importantly, listening to experiences different from our own, as you did tonight." As the meeting concluded, something unexpected happened. Parents and students began approaching me and my family, some offering apologies, others expressing admiration for my courage, still others simply introducing themselves and welcoming us to the community. Emma and her parents were among them. Her mother hugged me impulsively. "Thank you for educating us," she said, her eyes sincere. "I'm so sorry that happened to you." Emma's father shook my father's hand. "We should get the families together sometime. I think our girls might become friends." The next few weeks brought significant changes to Jefferson Middle School. Ms. Whitman did not return. I later learned she had been offered early retirement rather than termination, on the condition that she complete extensive diversity training. Ms. Chen proved to be everything Principal Castillo had promised: brilliant, engaging, and committed to broadening our literary horizons. More importantly, something shifted in the school's atmosphere. Students from different backgrounds began sitting together at lunch. The curriculum in all subjects, not just English, began to reflect a more inclusive approach to education. When a new student arrived, a boy from Syria, who spoke limited English, he was welcomed with patience and support, rather than mockery. As for me, I found my voice again, stronger than before. I joined the debate team, started writing for the school newspaper, and eventually ran for student council. Emma became one of my closest friends, a relationship that would last well into our adult years. On the last day of school that year, Principal Castillo called me to her office again. This time I walked with confidence, my head held high. "I wanted to thank you, Zora," she said once I was seated. "Your courage that night at the parent meeting helped change this school for the better." I shook my head. "You're the one who did something. You heard what was happening, and you stepped in." "Do you know why I was listening to the intercom that morning?" she asked, smiling slightly. I shook my head. "It wasn't coincidence. Your previous principal had called me personally before your arrival. He told me you were one of the brightest students he'd ever encountered, but that you were also transferring to a school with, let's say, room for growth in terms of diversity. He asked me to keep an eye out for you." I sat back, surprised. "So, you were listening because of me?" "I was listening because sometimes doing the right thing requires vigilance," she corrected gently. "But yes, I was particularly attentive that morning because I knew you were starting in Ms. Whitman's class, and I had my concerns about her approach to students of color." "You knew she might do something like that?" I asked, feeling a new wave of complicated emotions. Principal Castillo sighed. Let's just say there had been complaints before, but never enough concrete evidence to take action. Teachers with tenure are difficult to discipline without clear documentation. She leaned forward. What I want you to understand, Zora, is that change rarely happens all at once. It builds slowly, through small moments of courage and clarity. Like yours in that auditorium, you helped this community see itself more clearly, and that's a remarkable gift. As I left her office, I realized something profound. The humiliation I'd felt that first day had been transformed into something powerful. Not just for me, but for an entire school community. My pain had become a catalyst for growth. 20 years later, I still think about that turning point in my life. I became an education attorney, specializing in civil rights cases within school systems. My work takes me to districts across the country, helping to implement the kind of transformative policies that Principal Castillo pioneered at Jefferson. Last month, I was in my hometown for a conference and decided to visit my old middle school. The building looked smaller than I remembered, but the hallways still echoed with the same energetic chaos of adolescence. Principal Castillo had retired years ago, but her legacy remained evident in the diverse student artwork lining the walls, the multilingual welcome signs, the trophy case displaying achievements in everything from robotics to poetry slams. As I signed in at the front office, explaining that I was an alumna just wanting to take a nostalgic walk through my past, the secretary smiled. You should definitely check out our library. It was completely renovated last year. It's the pride of the district now. I thanked her and made my way down the familiar corridors, noticing both changes and constants. The library doors were propped open, revealing a bright modern space that bore little resemblance to the musty book repository I remembered. Students lounged in comfortable reading nooks, worked at sleek computer stations, or browsed shelves organized by genre rather than just the Dewey Decimal System. And there, at the circulation desk, sat a face I recognized despite the passage of 2 decades. Older, lined, hair now completely gray, but unmistakable, Ms. Whitman. My steps faltered. She looked up at the sound, her eyes widening in recognition. Zora Henderson, she said quietly. I wondered if our paths might cross again someday. I approached the desk slowly, unsure what to say. This woman had caused me such pain, had been the villain in a formative chapter of my life. Yet here she was, not as an English teacher, but working in the school library. Ms. Whitman, I acknowledged, my voice neutral. I'm surprised to see you here. She nodded, her expression unreadable. I imagine you would be. Please, sit down. She gestured to a chair beside her desk. I hesitated, then took the seat. What happened? She began. I didn't teach for several years. The district offered me early retirement, as I'm sure you know. I took the diversity training they required, initially just going through the motions. She arranged some papers on her desk, not quite meeting my eyes. But then something changed. I started actually listening to the perspectives being shared. I realized how much damage my narrow viewpoint had caused, not just to you that day, but to countless students over the years. I remained silent, watching her. 3 years ago, the school needed a part-time librarian. I applied, not expecting anything to come of it. But the new principal, who knew my history, decided to give me a chance with certain conditions. I've been here since trying to do better. My gaze traveled around the library, noting the prominent displays featuring diverse authors. One entire section was dedicated to American voices. remarkably similar to what Principal Castillo had written on the board that day long ago. "Was that your idea?" I asked, nodding toward the display. A faint smile crossed her face. "Yes, it's been quite popular with the students. Turns out there was never anything niche about these works. They just needed to be made accessible." The bell rang, signaling the end of a period. Students began filtering into the library, their voices rising and falling like waves. Ms. Whitman greeted several by name, her manner gentle and encouraging. "I owe you an apology, Zora," she said when the initial rush had subsided. "What I did that day was inexcusable. I let my prejudice override my responsibility as an educator. I failed you." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You did." She nodded, accepting this truth. "I understand if you can't forgive me. I wouldn't expect you to. But I want you to know that you changed me. Your courage that day, and at that parent meeting, it eventually got through to me." A student approached the desk then, asking for help finding resources for a research project on the Harlem Renaissance. Ms. Whitman's face lit up. "You're in luck," she told the girl. "We have an expert right here. This is Ms. Henderson. She's an education attorney now. But she was once a student here, and she knows quite a bit about the Harlem Renaissance writers." The girl looked at me eagerly. "Really?" "I'm focusing on Zora Neale Hurston for my project. Do you know her work?" I smiled, feeling the beautiful symmetry of the moment. I'm actually named after her. And yes, I'd be happy to help you navigate her writing. For the next 30 minutes, I guided the student through Hurston's major works, suggesting which might be most accessible for a middle school project, and explaining the historical context that shaped them. Ms. Whitman listened attentively, occasionally adding her own insights. As the student departed with a stack of books and a page of notes, Ms. Whitman turned to me. "You're a natural teacher, you know. Your passion for the subject is contagious." "I had good models," I replied. "Principal Castillo showed me what educational leadership should look like." Ms. Whitman nodded, a look of respect crossing her features. "She was remarkable, firm but fair, even with me, when I deserved to be fired outright." I considered this woman before me, so different from the rigid, dismissive teacher who had humiliated me all those years ago. Age had softened her, yes, but so had reflection, and it seemed, genuine remorse. "I'm leading a workshop next week," I heard myself saying, "for educators on creating inclusive classroom environments. It's at the conference center downtown. You might find it interesting." I pulled a business card from my purse and wrote the details on the back. Ms. Whitman accepted, it with visible surprise. "Thank you. I'd like that very much." As I prepared to leave, she asked, "How did you do it, Zora? How did you not let what happened that day defeat you?" I thought about my mother's words at the bus stop the morning after the incident. "Someone wise once told me that you may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. The difference between the two is actually quite vast." Walking out of Jefferson Middle School that day, I felt an unexpected lightness. The past hadn't changed. Ms. Whitman's actions that September morning had still been cruel and unjust. But seeing her transformation reminded me why I do the work I do. Because people can change, systems can improve. And sometimes, the girl, who was once made to feel she didn't belong, can help create spaces where everyone does. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone in authority made you feel like you didn't belong? Or perhaps you witnessed such a situation and weren't sure how to respond? I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you would have handled yourself in my position as that 12-year-old girl, or what you might have done as one of the other students in that classroom. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we share with each other, creating connections through our common experiences of challenge and resilience. If you know someone who might find strength or perspective in this story, please share it with them. We never know when our stories might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own voice.